if people say they have carpenter ants, I say that they have a moisture problem and they probably need to kind of look into that. And once they fix that, usually that takes care of the carpenter ant issue. Of course, there's some exceptions because it's biology and it's always complicated, but...
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Dr. Rachel Arango, Research Entomologist with the U.S. Forest Service. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk Podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding Podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. You can leave feedback and ask questions there too. Dr. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here.
So are you guys able to work you work in a lab in Wisconsin, that's correct?
Yep, I do.
Are you able to go to work normally, or have you had to change things up where you work?
We've changed things up a bit. I go in maybe once or twice a week. We kind of have staggered our schedules so that we're not running into lots of people. But I've been mostly working at home trying to get some writing done.
Yeah.
Which is good.
Do you like the arrangement, or would you rather be in the office all the time?
I don't mind so much. If I had my choice, I'd be running around in the woods all the time looking at bugs. But I like a balance of lab and office, and it's been mostly productive. So I think it's been good. But I'm excited to get back at some point. Yeah,
me too. Folks who watch the show on YouTube or on our podcast page might notice that I'm back in our studio, which has been not the case for months. So it's good to be back in our home base. So Can you please tell me what you do for the Forest Service and what your work entails?
Sure. I'm a research entomologist. So I'm part of a work unit that deals with all things that biologically degrade wood. So people in my group work on Basidiomycete wood rot fungi, molds, things like that. And my focus is on insects. So insects in wood products. So that mostly includes things like beetles or termites. Those are kind of my specialty groups, I guess. And I'm up in Wisconsin, so you can imagine there's not very many termites up here, but we definitely have some pockets of termites. And it makes studying termites up here really interesting because we're kind of the northern boundary for where subterranean termites can persist in the U.S. So most of my counterparts are down in Mississippi, where there's a lot more termites.
And different kinds, right? They have Formosan, right?
Yeah.
And they're more aggressive. Is that correct?
Yes, much more aggressive.
Have you noticed in the years you've been doing this that the places where termites can live have expanded in the U.S.? Is it moving northward?
That seems to be the case, and that's kind of some of the research that I've been doing up here is looking at some of the characteristics that are allowing termites to persist in more northern or colder climates. Because that is the concern, of course, is that they're going to be able to continue to move northward, and that does seem to be sort of the case, but we still need a lot more work to study that.
Mm. How did you get into this? Did you always like insects as a kid, or like what happened that sparked this interest for you?
I really did always like insects as a kid. I don't know. I just found them fascinating. That there was this tiny little world all around us that most people wouldn't necessarily pay attention to. But I didn't actually realize you could study something like this until college, which is late. But I took an undergrad entomology course with Dr. Dan Young at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. And he's just very charismatic and was really inspiring. And because I took that course, I could apply for a little part-time lab position at the Forest Products Lab. So when I was an undergrad student, I worked like 10 hours a week there, setting up termite tests and just doing basic lab stuff. And then after I graduated, I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to go, so I was actually the janitor at the Forest Products Lab for a very short amount of time. and they ended up offering to send me back to school for my master's and PhD. So now I've been at the Forest Products Lab for almost 17 years. It's kind of crazy,
That's
but I
impressive.
really like it.
Yeah.
It's,
What
yeah,
was
it's
your
kind of by accident.
what was your doctoral thesis on?
It's on bacterial associations in the termite gut. So, and
You
how
have to
that
tell me what
helps
that
them.
means.
So I was really interested in colony health and termites, how termite colonies were able to kind of avoid disease and pathogens in their environment. So I was looking at um, actinobacteria specifically. These are bacteria that tend to have a lot of antimicrobials associated with them.
Hmm.
Streptomyces is kind of a main contributor to our antibiotics. So I was looking at those bacteria in the termite gut to see if they played any role in pathogen inhibition in the nest. Because termites actually, subterranean termites make their nests out of these mud tubes, which are made up of feces and saliva. So that's why I was looking at the gut, because the gut is kind of extended into their mud tubes. So
That's
I was kind of pretending to be a bacteriologist a little bit.
What did you find?
Well, it's a lot more complicated than I had anticipated. There's definitely isolates with activity against a number of potential entomopathogens or insect pathogens. Um, I did find a really interesting association with pH, though, while I was doing this work. A
Soil
lot of these
pH?
so yeah, it seemed like the actinobacteria that I isolated from the termite guts, they all um, had this habit of increasing the pH to which has its own inhibitory properties. So um, I'm still there's still so much work to be done on it, but so my thing that I want to look into is maybe if termites are able to control the pH a bit in their environment, that alone would be enough to be antimicrobial, um, which would be pretty significant and a lot less costly than just producing lots of antimicrobials that the termites would have to deal with. So it's an ongoing process, and it's really interesting, but
Do you have to like pitch your research to the Department of Agriculture, which is the umbrella agency for the Forest Service, or do they give you assignments, for lack of a better word?
yeah. No, actually, I'm pretty free to kind of look into the things that I find fascinating. We do report what we do. Of course, they kind of see what we're up to, and then they can tell us, oh, that's not quite the direction we want you to go. But for the most part, we're pretty free to kind of look into the things that interest us. And so I have probably too many projects currently happening because I'm interested in way too many things. Um, so it's good and bad, I guess. Sometimes I wish I had more direction. Like you need to focus on this. Why are you're everywhere?
I I I get
But
that. I do. Much of your recent research, though, is focused on the efficacy of wood preservatives. What does the Forest Service and the U.S. Why does the Forest Service and the USD take an interest in this and in the research of pressure treating methods?
well, there's a few reasons that the Forest Service has a strong interest in the availability of durable wood products and preservative treated wood. One of the main reasons is to make sure that we make wise use of our forest sustainable resources. Um, the Forest Products Lab was actually started over 100 years because of concern over depleting the nation's hardwood supply. At the time, railroads were being constructed with untreated hardwoods, and these frequently needed to be replaced. So, by preserving the wood, the railroad ties and timbers could last many times longer, so that reduced the need to cut trees. And even today, it's estimated that 10 to 15% of the trees that are cut every year are used just to replace wood in structures that have been damaged by things like decay or termites.
Hmm.
So, using durable wood products or preservative treated wood can lessen our impact on our forest resources. And then, in addition to that, the federal government uses a large volume of wood products on its own infrastructure, like in marine pilings and bridges, utility poles, boardwalks, things like that. So, so the longer these timbers last, the less there's replacement costs for taxpayers, and also less risk of some kind of failure, which can have some serious consequences if you get failures in like bridge timbers. So that's kind of why we exist at the Forest Products Lab, I guess.
And you're physically testing little samples of wood. Is that correct? Can you
Yeah,
describe the test process?
sure. We do both lab and field testing. In the lab, we have a lot smaller specimens, and then it tends to be in like tiny bottles or like, tiny little setups. And then we try to use that data to inform um, on field data, but it's sometimes complicated because lab data doesn't always translate to what we actually see in the real world. So we also have a field site in Gulfport, Mississippi, where we have just thousands of little wood stakes, up to 2 by 4 size pieces of wood that we have out, and we go every year to rate them for termite and decay damage. And some of the samples have been out 50 plus years, and so it's really good information on how long preservatives last.
Do you have to introduce insects to consume these samples, or do they come on their own?
In the field, we just let whatever happen happen.
Uh-huh. And do you
Yeah,
see, you said some of those samples are really old. I'm gonna ask you,
yeah.
what is it? Is it creosote-based preservatives, or is it something else?
Yeah, we have some creosote samples out there, but um, it's interesting because in some of those really old sites, you'll see a few stakes sticking up, and usually those are the CCA treated stakes.
Which brings me to my next question. Many contractors that I've spoken with, and my own experience, would indicate that the copper-based preservatives we're now using aren't as long-lasting as CCA. Is that true?
Well,
Research demonstrated that?
well, it's a little bit of a hard question to answer, in part because the newer preservatives just haven't been out nearly as long, and so it's going to be probably some decades before we can say with absolute certainty how they'll compare exactly to CCA. And the other challenge of the failure pressure treated wood isn't just a function of efficacy, but also of treatment quality and construction methods and site conditions. We do know that CCA is a really effective wood preservative, and that CCA actually provides pretty substantial protection even when wood is somewhat undertreated. With the newer preservative formulations, treatment quality might be more important, as well as ensuring that the treated wood is used in the way that it's supposed to be used. Like, for example, to not put wood that's treated for above ground retentions in a situation where it might be in contact with the ground, or where it might be exposed to a higher decay hazard like moisture, increased moisture. So, so the suppliers have really become aware of this issue, and in the last few years, they've been actually treating lumber, like most lumber dimensions, to ground contact retentions.
Because people
Kind
were
of to,
using it that way anyway.
yeah, so they just want to make sure that it'll be durable regardless of how consumers use it. So that's kind of a newer thing that they're doing.
Do you
And we
find
do,
in a particular species various retention levels based on the individual piece of wood or the quality of the pressure treating process? I mean, does it vary how much preservative is in there?
well, they try to change the different treatment methods to make sure that we're getting the retentions that we're looking for, which is why some wood is incised, to kind of help with that. But it's also, if the wood is not able to get to that retention, then it's just not used for that application.
I see.
If they can't, yeah.
Are there any preservatives on the horizon that may be better than what we have access to now?
Um, so there's a lot of ongoing research of new potential wood preservatives, but it's really challenging to develop new products that have long-term protection. They're active against a range of microorganisms that they might encounter, and still have minimal risk to people and the environment. And then they also need to be inexpensive and practical. And if it's a new chemical, it has to be approved by the EPA, which can take a lot of time, several years of research too. Um, so there are a number of possibilities on the horizon, but a lot of these don't make it to market. But we're hoping that in the short term, the improvements to treatment quality are we're going to start seeing some less failures and better results, more sustainable durability, because the treaters are now treating most lumber to
To
these
ground.
ground contact. Yeah.
And what is that retention level so listeners know? Is it zero point 0.6 per cubic foot or is it higher?
Oh, I'd have to look.
Don't bother.
I can't remember off the top of my head since I don't look into it terribly much.
One of our
Um,
listeners is gonna like have that on the top of his or her head and let me know, I'm sure. So in the East, we use mostly pressure-treated yellow pine, and in the West, it's mostly pressure-treated incised Douglas fir. One of your recent research projects examined how much pressure treatment worked with some other wood species. First off, can you tell us why southern yellow pine and Douglas fir are primarily used in pressure treating applications, and what are the other species you tested, and did they work with regard to termites and I presume other bugs?
Yeah, so southern pine is widely used for pressure treatment because it's widely available, it grows quickly, and it has pretty good strength properties, and it also treats very easily. So that makes southern pine really attractive for treatment. Douglas fir is widely available in the West, so that's why it tends to be used more in the western states. It has good size, strength properties, but it has a large heartwood zone, and so that makes it a little bit more difficult to treat, which is why it's usually incised.
Because it's harder?
Others, because it's hard to
Yeah,
actually get the preservative to penetrate
I see.
into that wood species enough, so that's why they add the incising to that. Um, Western hemlock and hem fir species mix are also used a bit in the West. Some lodgepole and jack pine, but these also can be kind of difficult to treat and usually require some kind of incising. Um, so we have some of these treated and out in the field testing, and we're kind of looking at how those hold up over time. But that's definitely ongoing research.
Do you have any general uh, takeaways yet?
Um, well, nothing specific yet.
Okay.
We started looking at natural durability of some of these woods on their own, and then how they compare to treated products. But it's definitely going to be. It takes a while to actually get a good understanding of how long these products last in a field setting.
Decades,
Um,
right? I mean,
yeah,
because they're going to be in
yeah,
service for decades potentially, right?
right,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's that's one of the best parts about the lab is we can have these studies that go on for so many years. University settings, they want results and data,
Yeah.
right away. But it's
Because they
kind
got
of
to get
nice to
paid.
have these. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, people that set up these tests are long retired and which is it's kind of crazy to think about.
That you're finishing someone else's research. Yeah. That's kind of cool, though.
Yeah. And that hopefully stuff will go on long past all the wood sticks that we've put in the ground ourselves.
That's cool. I've heard that if you keep wood dry, termites, carpenter ants, and other insects will leave it alone. Is that true or is that overly simplified?
um, I would have to say that it's both.
Okay.
Carpenter ants. So carpenter ants definitely are associated with moisture. They prefer to nest in wood that already has some decay occurring, because they don't actually consume the wood, they just are nesting in it.
Mm.
And so it's easier for them to excavate wood that already has some rot in it. So usually with carpenter ants, for the most part, if people say they have carpenter ants, I say that they have a moisture problem and they probably need to kind of look into that. And once they fix that, usually that takes care of the carpenter ant issue. Of course, there's some exceptions because it's biology and it's always complicated.
Right.
But for the most part, yeah, carpenter ants for sure. Termites are definitely a different issue. First, it depends on the kind of termite you're dealing with. So for dampwood termites, these guys are more like carpenter ants in that they prefer decayed wood. But unlike carpenter ants, they are actually consuming the wood. So usually finding these termites is also an indication that you might have a moisture problem. And if you fix that, then that should eliminate dampwood termite activity. But other termites like drywood termites, they attack relatively dry wood, as the name implies,
Mhm.
like less than 12% moisture content. And wood in homes is usually between maybe 8 and 15%. So
They're
these
happy
termites,
there.
they're happy there. These are the ones that you would see them put up like one of those circus tents for. And that's what they're
Fumigate,
treating
yeah.
for. Yeah, because they don't have any contact with the ground or the soil underneath. Um,
And are those, spread throughout the country, or are they limited geographically?
they tend to occur more in the warmer, humid climates. But they can occur in like little pockets. These termites can sometimes be transported in like a piece of furniture.
Mhm.
So because they form kind of smaller colonies. So there's been weird situations where somebody buys some kind of wooden frame of some sort, and then they're in that. So that's kind of crazy. But mostly it's like the warmer climates. So we don't see them much up here in Wisconsin.
And then
um,
Formosan termites are the mac daddy of the termite species, right? They are really aggressive and successful. Is that true?
yeah. So subterranean termites in general are the ones that most people are going to encounter in their life and have to deal with in a home situation. Um, yeah, these things are very efficient at recycling wood. I really enjoy them, but um, I wouldn't necessarily want them in my own home, I guess.
What do you like about them?
They're just very industrious. And I don't know. They, I think they're pretty cute, but I'm probably a little bit biased. I mean, they just eat the wood. They're yeah, they're just fascinating to watch. And the workers, since they're subterranean, they're not exposed to the sun
They're, like,
or
clear, right?
external environment. So yeah, so they're kind of see-through.
Yeah.
So I've actually, if you feed them a pink Post-it note, you can see a little pink in their mouth.
That's
I mean,
hilarious.
it's just fascinating insects, really. But they can do a lot of damage. And yeah, and the Formosan termites, yeah, those guys they were introduced in the 1960s. I think they were first found in Texas, and they're kind of distributed across the southeastern U.S. right now. And those are some termites that people are really interested in looking at how their range might extend northward, of course, because they form really large subterranean populations, and so they can do a lot of damage in a pretty short amount of time.
Do we know where they came from?
They're endemic to Taiwan and southern China,
And they
so
probably came in a pallet or something, right?
yeah, some kind
Interesting.
of wood product. Yeah.
If you had to build a deck or outdoor structure, what species and preservative would you want? And would there be any additional techniques for construction that you would employ to help keep them at bay?
So you think this is a simple question, but it's not. It's a bit
Nothing
complicated.
in science is, there's never a simple answer, right?
Yeah, well, there's so much diversity. Species and preservative combination would depend on the type of structure, of course, and then your geographic location of where you're building. East of the Mississippi, wood would almost exclusively be southern pine because it treats so well with different preservative types. In terms of preservative choice, so you want to start thinking about the application. And a really good resource for this is the American Wood Protection Association, or AWPA, because they standardize and evaluate all the different preservative combinations, and then they separate them into different use categories.
Hmm.
So, use category 3 would be for exterior wood that would be above ground. And then use category 4 is for wood in ground contact.
Hmm.
Um, so, when you purchase any lumber, you want to be sure that the preservative combination has been evaluated by the AWPA, which you can determine by just looking at the little end tag that's usually stapled to the wood itself, and it'll have the acronym AWPA on it. And then it'll also specify the use category. So, as an example, say you want to build a deck outside your home, and most of the available lumber that you're going to get is going to be treated with some kind of waterborne copper treatment. So then the type of wood and preservative combination depends on the part of the deck where it's going to be installed. And that's when it's important to look at use category. So in
The
a deck,
distinction is between things that go in the ground and things that are above the ground. Is that correct?
yes, yeah, and also things that provide structural support,
Hmm.
versus things like railings that are not gonna. Well, I guess they could provide some important support for
Let's say
not falling
lattice,
off the
something that
deck,
was
but
not gonna, it's
yeah,
gonna grow flowers, not hold people, right?
yeah. And then also, like, if you're in Mississippi, you have a higher decay hazard than I would up in Wisconsin. So those are things to take into account. Um, but there are so many different situations and options that require preservative treated wood, and so it gets a little complicated. But actually, my colleague at Forest Products Lab, Dr. Stan Lebo, he just released a publication called Guidelines for Selection and Use of Preservative Treated Wood, which I can maybe share the link with you.
Please. Yeah, if you email that to me, we'll put it on the podcast page so
Okay,
people can
that
look
would
at
be
that.
great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so it provides so much information on all the different acronyms, all the different preservatives, what they tend to be used for, all the use categories. And then there's also this really cool app that I became aware of just recently. It was released by the Western Wood Preservers Institute. And if you just search treated wood guide, it has info on all the available preservatives. And you just click on, like, oh, I want to build a deck. I need this. I'm here. And it kind of gives you, oh, these are the preservatives. It's a really cool app. So that's a good thing to check out too if you're wondering what kind of lumber is best to purchase
Awesome.
for,
That's
for
helpful.
your project. Yeah.
So another paper that I looked at of yours was you looked at the social qualities of insects and termites. I think most people would describe people as social animals also. What does the insect world have to teach us about social order and the success of a population? And this is a
Um,
complicated question, but maybe you got some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things we can learn from insects, especially social insects. We could talk about for a million years. I mean, we are very similar to insects in a lot of ways. They live in a common nest site. They work together to raise their young. They forage for food. In some cases, they even grow their own food and have little gardens. So because of this, they do face some of the same challenges that we would: exposure to pathogens and spread of disease in a colony. Um, so those are all things we can look at in insects and maybe sometimes apply it to our own world and see how do they alleviate some of this risk. And I guess one component that's made social insects so successful is their resilience when they're faced with some type of disturbance or challenge, and they respond together as a colony to rebuild. And so, by working together, they can do these amazing things. Like if you look at the leafcutter ant galleries, subterranean galleries, and their fungal gardens underground.
That just
I
creeps
mean,
me
they're
out,
just
sister.
they're just fascinatingly complex. Leafcutter ants are adorable. They're so funny with their little leaves. But they're just amazingly industrious when they work together. So maybe that says something about how we should work together when we have challenges. I don't know.
Oh man. So do you work on your own house? Can you tell me about it? Do you have any like insect problems you're happily ignoring or dealing with?
um, so I actually just bought my first home.
Congratulations.
This thanks this last February, and it's actually brand new construction, which is kind of fun. It wasn't intended, but it kind of worked out that way. My sister bought a house down the road, so it's her fault. She's like, "You should buy a house." So now I'm pretty close to my sister. So I'm just starting to sort of fix stuff up around here,
Mhm.
and thankfully don't have any insect issues going on. I do have a lot of pet insects in the house, but those are intentional.
Do you like
I
pets?
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots.
Neat. Cool.
I even have a little termite. It looks like a little termite ant farm of the damp wood termites. And so
How did
I
you
was
tell your
laughing.
landlord about that when you were renting?
Yeah, so I had a condo before this, and when I was going to sell the condo, you have to, disclose any insects that you might have, any insect issues. And I jokingly told my realtor that um, I have termites, but technically they're pets. He's like, "Don't put
Don't
that
even
on the
mention it.
phone. Don't mention that."
Oh, it has been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun.
It's been really fun. You're a hoot. I got to try the experiment with the pink termites. I got to tell you, that's hilarious.
They are pretty cute. You're going with me on that?
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Dr. Rachel for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Dr. Rachel, thank you again. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thanks,
Yeah,
everybody.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe and happy building.